Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and welcome to Opera 101 with the Cleveland Opera Theater. My name is Stephanie Ruozzo, and I'm an Education and Outreach Associate with the Cleveland Opera Theater. And Opera 101 is our Monday through Friday daily series where we get to chat all things opera. So please do chat. Pop a question in the comment box at any time if you have any comments, questions, suggestions in real time, and we'll get to them right then and there. Or please feel free to email me at sruozzo@clevelandoperatheater.org. That's SRUOZZO at clevelandoperatheater.org. And I would be very glad to discuss anything or get you any information you may be looking for. So today, as you know, we are celebrating Verdi month, the entire month of June, and our opera for this week is Aida. And I know normally I take you back in the past and look at some aspect of opera that fed into the things that we're looking at today. But this time, I actually want to take you into an issue that is facing opera practitioners in the present surrounding the opera Aida. And there is a very, very big debate swirling around Aida and a couple other operas that will come up right at this moment. And it's been a huge topic of conversation for the past few years in the opera world, and especially ramping up just within the past couple of years. So the reason that Aida becomes a hot button issue is because of the way we costume, or more accurately make up, our prima donna in this opera. And the reason that it becomes an issue is because our prima donna in this instance is portraying an Ethiopian princess. So how do we do that on stage while remaining culturally sensitive? And what are some of the things that people might be reacting to when that practice is in effect? So the reason people react so strongly to the way we make up our prima donna in an opera like Aida is because there is this tradition of blackface makeup in America. And that is a specifically American tradition that I want to address separately from our beloved art form of opera. So what is blackface and why is it offensive? Well, first of all, blackface is this practice of using burnt cork and rubbing it on your face as a form of makeup, and later grease paint was used. And when we put this burnt cork makeup on, it allowed white performers to impersonate African Americans. And this practice began in the early 1800s when a performer named Thomas Dartmouth Rice began portraying a character called Jim Crow. And if that sounds familiar, that's because this character of Jim Crow entered the cultural consciousness and in some very harmful ways. So when Thomas Dartmouth Rice popularized this with his Jim Crow character, some other performers took to the practice, and by 1843, a troupe named the Virginia Minstrels became the first troupe to tour in all blackface makeup and popularize the idiom around the country. And oddly enough, this was mostly popular in the North rather than the South. It's kind of an idiosyncratic thing. We might think that the North was free of some of those barriers, but it wasn't. Minstrelsy was actually taking root and most beloved in the North. And minstrel shows were so unfortunate because their humor was based on the perpetuation of a bunch of negative stereotypes surrounding the African American population. They would use this ridiculous dialect, completely made up accents that were not reflective of any existing speech pattern in America. And usually the characters in a minstrel show would be like lazy, violent, buffoonish, a lot of negative things. And these stereotypes lasted well into the 20th century. We can point to Al Jolson in the very first sound film, The Jazz Singer. We can look at Mickey Rooney and Judy Garland's portrayal of minstrel shows in their backstage musicals of the 30s. And even in the late 30s, Fred Astaire's tribute to Bojangles, where he donned blackface to represent Bojangles in a different skit. And even Irving Berlin's song Mandy during World War II was a minstrel song, and Irving Berlin had his performers in blackface as late as the 40s. So the most damaging legacy of blackface are these negative stereotypes and the way it popularizes certain untruths, falsehoods about the African American population. Now, what does that have to do with Aida? Because we rightfully say opera is not minstrelsy, and no, it is not. But it comes into play, it intersects with Aida because of the plot. So just a quick rundown of the plot of Aida. So an Egyptian general, Radames, returns to Memphis, not that Memphis. Unfortunately, we don't get any good Elvis tunes here, but Memphis, Egypt, in triumph after a fresh conquest of their Ethiopian neighbors, during which Radames has captured the Ethiopian king Amenazro. And we learn that Radames is secretly in love with an Egyptian slave named Aida, who happens to be Amenazro's daughter. So she's the king's daughter. And Aida is secretly torn between loyalty to this captive father and her love for Radames. And Radames, likewise, is torn between his love for Aida and his duty to the Egyptian princess Amneris, whom he is pledged to marry. So when Amneris learns about the secret love affair between Radames and Aida, she condemns both of them to be buried alive together, and that is our tragic ending. And here I just want to throw out a quick reminder of Verdi's history of the Risorgimento opera and its basis in addressing political issues. So he's again talking about the injustice of foreign occupation. He's talking about the injustice of rule not by the people of a land. And again, he gets around the censorship issue by placing it back in the ancient world. So he could stay out of conflict with his 19th century contemporaries by looking at the issues from an ancient Egyptian lens. And the scenario for this opera was actually by an Egyptologist and archaeologist named Auguste Mariette. And Megan talked about him a bit yesterday and Mariette's role in forming the story. But this guy was actually a scholar who studied the culture and the past of Egypt. So Verdi, perhaps when he composed this, didn't mean Aida to be about race. But in the intervening centuries, it's kind of taken on that tone because it's hard to escape that association when we're dealing with the subject of colonialization in Africa. And in fact, if you look at the Disney and Elton John, Tim Rice musical that was staged in 2002 on Broadway, that musical does make it explicitly about race. And there is a very strong racial component where African Americans are cast as Aida and her compatriots, whereas white actors are cast in the role of the Egyptians. So for this reason, Aida and the other Ethiopian slaves in opera get represented with darker skin. And the reason this is a problem is because most opera singers happen to be white. And so there's this battle between authenticity to the libretto and casting the most famous names in opera who will draw attention to the production and sell tickets. So there's a battle of where our loyalties lie and what our priorities are when we're staging Aida. So how do we reconcile these impulses? And there are a few possible solutions that opera companies can look at. Well, the first is to make the argument that European opera is completely different from American minstrelsy, and the staging of one should not be affected by the staging of the other. After all, what does American vernacular art of the 19th century have to do with European high art, which supposedly transcends the popular idiom and transcends earthly concerns, period, to be more of a spiritual experience? Um, and the problem with ignoring it and separating the two is that the influence throughout the culture has already been spread, and it's hard to ignore those influences in the present day. We might have been able to ignore them in the 1800s, but it gets a lot more complicated now that we have these decades, centuries of history behind us. So the other solution is to cast singers of color in the race representing the characters they portray. And this is a boon to the genre of opera because it affords us greater representation. We draw in more artists. We draw in more people who feel connected to the art form when there's proper representation. The slight drawback of that could be, does it dehumanize singers of color further by forcing them to be complicit in perpetuating certain stereotypes, or is it a gesture of tokenism? We have to make sure if we commit to diversity, we really commit to diversity and not just as a surface gesture. The third solution could be casting white singers without makeup and just go on with a colorblind casting role. Why can't a white woman portray Aida? And the slight drawback then is, does this deny employment to marginalized performers who already have limited opportunities to take part in a cast on stage? So is it better to cast a white person and elide the issue? I don't have answers. Today, this is going to be an issue of Opera 101 where I don't provide facts. Because, well, I hope I have provided facts, but I don't provide a definitive take on these facts because I am not a singer. Full disclosure, I'm an academic who plays the clarinet. I'm not a singer, so I don't pretend to have ever considered the role of Aida for myself. But there are voices that we can listen to. So a couple mainstream opera singers that I would like to draw attention to are Tamara Wilson, who is a white soprano. She sang the role of Aida at the Arena di Verona, where there is a 106-year-old tradition of completely making up the Aida actor or singer in very, very dark black makeup. And she compromised. Not happily, but she compromised by saying, well, we won't go with full black makeup. Why don't we just go a few shades darker than my natural skin tone? And she also requested sleeves. So there would actually be less skin to make up, it would take away attention as far as possible from the shade of her skin and from the makeup of it. And her philosophy around it is that we must modernize for the sake of opera's survival. Her belief is in colorblind casting as a necessary practice in the 21st century so that we can be inclusive to all people, so that we can pay attention to the music more than the humans who are singing it. Another mainstream opera singer who's taken a stance on this role is Anna Netrebko. And just in February of this year, before the world turned topsy-turvy, she was contracted to sing Aida at the Met's brand new production they were going to unveil this very year. And she kind of became a lightning rod surrounding the Aida issue because she defended the practice of the darkening makeup by saying that it would be disrespectful not to show a darker skin tone. It would be disrespectful to pretend that Aida was not an Ethiopian. So again, I want to emphasize that I don't have answers, but some people do, and some other voices should be heard. So I'm linking you up in the box describing our video today. I'm linking you to a Long Beach opera forum that was just conducted this past weekend. It's a panel discussion by several opera practitioners of color who address the reality, things that perhaps I, as a not African American would not see, would not experience, would not even notice. So I urge you to check out that panel discussion and to listen to those voices. I'm also linking a Washington Post interview that addresses, again, elevating the voices of practitioners of color who do experience these things directly. And in the meantime, I have to be very grateful that I am with the Cleveland Opera Theater that commits quite regularly to being an equitable and just opera company. And so I'm very grateful on that front that I am with a group of people committed to doing the right thing. And in the meantime, I urge you to go check it out, do some research, form your own opinions, gather your own perspectives. And in the meantime, please do check out our website, clevelandoperatheater.org. Please do check out, sign up for our mailing list so you can get all of our written communications directly. Like our Facebook page so you can keep up with us in real time, chat with us, talk to us anytime you have any info or question. And please do tune in tomorrow for our special Page to Stage edition of Opera 101. And we'll look forward to seeing you then. Thanks, everybody. Bye.